The name, Augustus, was a monument to a past aspiration, a grand pronouncement of dignity and esteem that had long since curdled into the bitterest irony in the unforgiving landscape of his life. In this failing rust-belt city, where the soot-stained bricks held more pedigree than the people, and where fortunes were measured in the decades since the last factory shuttered, Augustus did not mean venerable or majestic. It meant the one who doesn't fit everyone, including Augustus himself, preferred the clipped, unassuming Darren, a dull, gray syllable that matched a color he believed his existence possessed. Darren Finch was a walking contradiction, a young man whose mind was a sprawling, incandescent landscape of philosophy, history, and nascent poetry, yet whose self-perception was as cramped and dark as the alleyways behind his dilapidated home. His intelligence, sharp enough to dissect complex metaphysical texts or translate Horace, was his solitary, silent weapon, perpetually holstered because he lacked the courage to believe it mattered against the visceral judgment of the world. He moved with a perpetual slouch, an unconscious physical apology for his presence. His darker, slightly too large features, the kind of features that faded into the background while others, bright and sharp, dominated the foreground of life's stage. His inferiority complex was not merely a feeling but a crippling identity, a psychological scar tissue built up over 2 decades of subtle and overt societal dismissal. He was profoundly, inconveniently kind, a soul naturally inclined toward altruism and gentle consideration, but this kindness was weaponized against him by his own perception, seeing it not as virtue but as the desperate overcompensation of a man who knew his worth was negligible. His home was not a sanctuary but a crucible of casual cruelty, a dense, crowded habitat where the very air was thick with resentment and barely veiled disdain. 2 of his older brothers, hulking men whose physicality perfectly matched the hard, unforgiving ethos of the town, occupied the main floors with their wives, creating a perpetual cacophony of loud television, aggressive banter, and judgmental whispers. Darren occupied a perpetually dim, repurposed attic room, a space beneath the eaves that felt less like a bedroom and more like a storage unit for an inconvenient truth. The brothers viewed his continued presence as a deliberate, parasitic burden, a stain on their precarious lower middle-class stability. "Why's he still here? That brain of his ain't paying the gas bill," he once heard his brother, Mitch, snort, the words piercing the thin floorboards above. The wives, sharp-tongued and quick to enumerate the grocery costs, regarded him with the patronizing pity reserved for an eccentric cousin who simply refused to grasp the obvious. That he should leave, find a job, any job, and cease being the quiet, intelligent anchor dragging down the family's image. He was the perpetual outlier, the one who read books when he should be fixing things, the one who sought beauty in meter and rhythm when he should be focused on the pragmatic, dirty mechanics of survival. He often ate his meals in his attic room, the lukewarm food tasting faintly of shame, the quiet solitude preferable to the barbed atmosphere of the communal kitchen. The cruelty was not always intentional. Sometimes, it was simply the byproduct of their own frustration, their inability to grasp his intellectual world manifesting as dismissal of his entire being. In the midst of this domestic gloom, only Sarah, his younger sister, offered the slightest flicker of genuine human warmth. Sarah, only 16 but possessed of a fierce, protective spirit, saw past the slouch and the silence to the blazing intelligence he hid. She would sneak him extra slices of pie, or simply sit on the stairs and talk to him about her day, her presence a silent, unwavering validation that he was not, in fact, merely a ghost haunting the family home. Her affection was the fragile scaffolding that kept his self-esteem from complete collapse, a tiny, invaluable island of unconditional acceptance in a vast, cold sea of judgment. Sarah knew about the poetry, the notebooks filled with intricate sonnets and sprawling free verse that Darren only shared with the paper, his truest, most sympathetic confidant. The poems were always dark, self-mocking, and intensely beautiful, a contradiction that perfectly mirrored the poet himself. They were not laments of the world's injustice, but scathing critiques of his own failure to measure up, an intellectual's attempt to preempt the world's judgment by issuing the harshest verdict first. His work was a constant, eloquent expression of his personal irony, a poet of the human condition who felt utterly inhuman. The single most significant axis of his life, however, revolved around his tutoring sessions with Clara Vance. Clara lived 2 doors down in a house that, though modest, possessed a subtle air of maintained respectability, a manicured lawn, fresh paint, a palpable sense of generational security. She was everything Darren was not, effortlessly beautiful, radiating a soft, golden warmth that seemed to reflect the sun even in this perpetually gray city. Her skin was fair, her hair a cascade of pale blonde, and her eyes the clear, startling blue of a pristine summer sky. She was the very embodiment of the ideal that society relentlessly held up as the standard of worth, the kind of exquisite, delicate beauty that seemed to demand and receive effortless privilege. Darren was tutoring her in Introduction to Literature, a course she found tedious, but which he taught with an almost religious fervor, using the texts as secret vehicles for his own philosophical explorations. His love for Clara was an all-consuming, profound, and entirely hidden affair. It was not merely infatuation but an obsession born of tragic recognition. He loved her not just for her beauty, but because she represented the unreachable ideal of grace, acceptance, and social currency that his entire life was a refutation of. To love Clara was to love the kind of life he could never lead, the kind of person he could never be. He sat opposite her at the dining room table, the scent of her light perfume and the soft sound of her voice constituting the only genuine joy in his week, yet every moment was a torment. He would listen to her struggle with a line of Shakespeare, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs, his mind composing 1,000 elaborate, passionate declarations, only to force his mouth to utter a perfectly modulated, entirely detached explanation of iambic pentameter. He saw her as a goddess, a celestial being, and saw himself as a dusty, earthbound creature unworthy of even breathing the same air. This immense chasm between them was not Clara's creation, but Darren's. She treated him kindly, sometimes playfully, occasionally even teasing him about his encyclopedic knowledge, but her kindness only cemented his conviction that she saw him as what he was, a useful, intelligent, but utterly asexual and non-threatening fixture, the reliable tutor, the safe friend. Any genuine expression of his love, he believed, would be met with bewildered revulsion, and would shatter the fragile, precious arrangement that allowed him to exist, however marginally, in her orbit. So, he built walls of wit and detachment, using his intelligence as an emotional insulator. His poetry became the only outlet for this crushing, unrequited devotion. In his attic, under the meager glow of a dusty lamp, he would transcribe his agonizing feelings into verse, using metaphors of iron, shadow, and decay to describe his soul, contrasting them with images of light, gold, and spring to describe her. These poems, secret confessions locked within the pages, were the truest voice of Augustus Finch, a voice that celebrated the beauty of the unreachable object while simultaneously reviling the grotesque inadequacy of the observer. "My name is a cruel boast of marble and column," one passage read, "but my heart is a rusting hinge on a door that was never meant to open, watching the sunrise in a window I cannot touch." This profound, secret love was the core of his misery and the engine of his brilliance, forcing him to translate his yearning into art. A perfect example of his personal tragedy, an aspiring poet whose greatest, most fervent subject was the beautiful woman whose existence proved his own worthlessness, ensuring that Augustus would remain, forever, the name of irony. The episode closed with Darren, notebook open, staring at a half-finished sonnet while the voices of his brothers and their wives echoed faintly from below, a suffocating, mundane reminder of the prison walls built around his magnificent, aching heart.